Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny meeting. It's now 7 p.m. and I'd like to start the meeting. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No, Chair, no apologies received tonight.
Full house, that's great. Item 2, the minutes, pages 5 to 18 on the agenda. I move that the minutes of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 6th of October 2022 to be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Can't see any indication. Can we move to approve those minutes, please? Is there an agreement? It's been agreed, thank you. The minutes from the ASLEF meeting held on the 20th of Agenda 2022 are also included within the agenda for the committee's information. Item 3, urgent items of business. No items of urgent business have been received. I've not accepted any. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest to make? Again, I see no indications in the room. Moving on to item 5, report of the Cabinet Member for Central Services. This is found on pages 19 to 38. We've allowed about 30 minutes for this agenda item. Can I please ask Councillor Duffin to present his report?
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't take too much time out by talking on the report because I know you'd all rather ask me questions than hear me just talk. So I want to point to some highlights. Firstly, thank you for everything everyone within this portfolio has achieved. And there's lots of ambitious stuff taking forward. Some I'll just touch on in a minute. A few highlights I want to point out to. The local full fibre network, phase 2, funded from a 2.5 million Getting Building Fund grant, has rolled out 85 sites and additional 75 kilometres of spine fibre to rural areas. I know your ward is something that, having campaigned there in the past, is a regular topic that comes up. That areas in Stamford, Corringham, I know we continue to do more because we'd love to roll fibre out across the entire borough, but the more we can do, the better. We processed 98% of FOR requests within the 20 working day timeframe. The Information Commission expects 90%, but that's one that I continue to aspire to. If the target is realistically 100%, let's set the bar higher than just what the Information Commission expects. Within communications, our customer service performance was again recognised externally with accreditation of the Customer Contact Association version 7 global standard. And our e-newsletter continues to be a valuable channel for reaching residents directly through key information and updates. 98,000 Thurrock residents are subscribed to it, which just in its own right is an staggering amount of people. And then not just lots of people subscribe to it, lots of people are actually reading it, because the local government benchmark for good communication opening is 33%. We're achieving 65% week-on-week open rate in Thurrock, which is incredibly impressive, and anyone that's ever worked in comms, anything in that world, most people are really happy with 33%, but it's good to see that residents are engaging with it and it's a useful source of getting information out. I know the digital strategy has come to this committee before, but there's a few things in there that it came to Cabinet last night, and I do want to touch on because I've got some ambitious plans in that area that it's difficult at times for residents to contact the council, and I want to bring a whole new level of transparency there with one clear front door where people can go in and communicate. So rather than the aspect of whether they use a particular email or wherever it's going, it can often be seen at times from a resident's perspective, we got lost. Who knows where that is? And there is lots of technology out there these days. An organisation like Zendesk, as an example, is something I work with, day-to-day job, that you submit a ticket and you instantly, at any time, can log in to your account and you can see what is going on with that ticket. It's not this whole searching emails, chasing it up. You can see, and that level of transparency is there. It's one way you can have multiple people on it, because if you're submitting that on behalf of a resident, why should the resident wait for you to get contacted and then pass it back to the resident? Let's have that information as transparent and moving as quickly as possible. It also means that when an inquiry goes in, rather than it sitting there and someone manually having to send it to the right department or right area, the more we can speed that up, it's quicker response for our residents. So lots of exciting work going on there. It's not stuff that's going to happen overnight. It's a big project, the way that we need to transform the entire way we do digital in the council. And also people hear digital strategy, they're scared about, well, what happens to those that aren't digitally savvy, digitally engaged? The benefit of having an efficient digital strategy is more time and resources can go to those people that, hey, they want to pick up a phone, they want to walk into a front door, whatever option it might be, through whatever they might want to do that just allows for more bandwidth to do things like that. So lots of exciting stuff going on, but I won't continue talking. I'll pass it back and, hey, there might be stuff where questions come and then I'll expand further, but hey, I'd rather give the time to you than to me.
Thank you, Councillor Duffin, for your report and attendance tonight. I'm sure members are going to have some questions. I've got quite a lot of experience in this. I'd rather open it up to the committee first, and then I'll come back with my questions later. Councillor Carter.
Thank you for your update, Councillor Duffin. I would like to go back to, we were talking on the week-on-week average open rate of 65% for our e-newsletter. I was wondering, what is the range that average was taken over, if you know, sorry.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you which ranges and data samples that it's used from. I can certainly go away and ask the question.
Because I'd quite like to know what it is currently at now, as if it was just high during the pandemic and then has come down, I think. Because I know it was a very vital tool during the pandemic to reach people and keep the residents informed. So I'd like to see, if you could just email me.
Yeah, no, I'll certainly go away and I'll find that question out and see.
Thank you.
Over a wider time span. One thing I did mention with the digital strategy, that another part that I'm keen to bring in that I think councillors will be really interested when it's all there, is each time someone digitally engages with the council, I've asked that we get to the stage where there is an individual, both qualitative in the terms of I want them to grade that experience 1 out of 5 stars. So really simple to not make it tough for people to give their honest feedback, and then have a box for comments, so that both sides of that is collected. And hey, I'll hold my hands up. I'm not expecting it to be everything's 5 stars, everyone loves everything the council says, because it might be a question of I want my kid into that school and you live on the other side of the borough. You might not be happy with the answer you get, but it's important information for us to find out, and then we can really drill in and find out which departments and areas are responding and engaging well to residents and which areas aren't. And then sharing best practice, because there is good practice we can share and there is issues where we can really look into that. So it's one that it'll be an ambitious piece of work. Might not be the best thing I'd ever see, and that's a piece of information that I would want them reports to come back to corporate ONS. We have the great like KPI stuff. I think this is, whether it's attached to that and how that works in the future, we can work that one out, but I think it's a useful piece to see which areas are great at engaging with our residents and which ones need some work.
Thank you. Going to go to Councillor Arnold, then Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Again, digital transformation. I know it's coming, and it's going to be a very good thing when it really completely arrives. But obviously, we're all really, really aware that there are an awful lot of residents out there that are uncomfortable with the advancement in technology. Can you tell me what Thurrock is doing different to other services, other boroughs, etc., that will actually make us better than them? What are you actually doing to actually make it a better improvement for our residents?
So I don't spend much of a focus on asking the question of what do we do better in Thurrock than other places. It's not a question that I sort of focus on. It's how do we make Thurrock better, and how do we do that. So it's not one that I've got an answer for you on where we benchmark against different places on service and offering, but we've got that 24/7 contact line for sort of immediate cases that are there. There was one reported, it was in, I believe it was Stamford, because came from Councillor Ralph, that someone was homeless and within 3 hours we were acting on it. Street homeless, that is. And that sort of response time is great. We're seeing things working. but it's one that the contact centre is still there. It's not one where digital transformation is shutting the door, stopping anyone contacting the council, turning off the phones and saying if you haven't got a computer there's no chance. There is both sides to it, but there is lots of people that don't want to pick up the phone and speak to someone. There's growing data from across whichever organisation you work in, where particularly younger people, whether that's leading to things, the rise of Uber, organisations like that, where people can digitally buy, purchase, engage, that there is lots of people that do want to go that way too. So it's not about excluding anyone, it's about making it as efficient as possible, because we want people to get the answers as quickly as possible.
I mean, I don't claim to be very technically minded myself, but I mean, is there benchmarking done against other authorities, other industries, other services, where we can measure ourselves? And like I say, I'm just stressing that we are actually going above and beyond what others do to actually make this service much, much better than others, because I think that's really where we need to be and going towards.
Can I just ask, is this just the digital part of the service or everything? Yeah. So it's one that there's going to be a whole piece of work for what does this final offering look like, and the digital strategy contained, I think it was about 30 pages in there, so it's a broad piece of work, but it's one of taking best practice from all places and making sure we deliver that. And it's not one that overnight you just turn it on and you deliver the final package. It's one where we need to look at all the processes that every single part of the council operates, because there are many different departments in the council that operate completely different systems or different things, and that is a piece of work that is ongoing, where we bring it all together and make sure we're moving in the right direction. Obviously there is departments that, whether it's vulnerable children, that need different systems, because hey, that's not a department which housing probably does, but say bins, for example, it's very specific and specialised. But the digital is making sure that for a resident, it's so easy to contact the council and get the answer they want.
Councillor Kent.
Yeah, a few questions. If you start with full fibre network, Thurrock's currently at 48% coverage. I'd just like an idea of what the plan is to get up to full coverage. On the civic offices, I've got 2 points. The first is I find it really off-putting that the doors are locked to keep the public out. So we have a meeting like this evening. Having locked doors sends a really odd signal. Doors should be open. Public should be allowed, freely and come and see what we're doing. I'd like an explanation as to why that is. We've got a council chamber that you say open to the public, etc., etc. Can somebody explain why we've managed to build a public chamber, a council chamber that doesn't have a hearing loop? I just find that bizarre in this day and age, and I would like an explanation. When we come on to human resources and organisational development, just the kind of very broad question, I guess, given the state of the council finances, given where we are, what are you doing to keep people well motivated and to make sure that people are continuing with some sort of optimism in their roles? Just a comment really on media relations. We know that media relations have been absolutely dire. I know there are efforts being made to try and improve it. I'd just like some comfort that that's going to be continued. And finally, when we come to electoral services, you mention that voter ID will be in force at the next elections, and electoral registration offices based on local authorities to issue free electoral identification documents. When are we going to start rolling that out in Thurrock? Because May will be with us before we know it.
So I'm going to try to go through the questions. If I forget any, by all means, because I think it was about 7. So in terms of the full fibre, I don't have timescales, because I'd love to say here we've got money, we can pay for it, expanded over the borough. I think it's one where it's looking at grants, opportunities that arise, and then targeting those in the order that we see. In terms of the council building, it's certainly one I can take away and ask. I guess it's deciding what we want the offer to be. Is it somewhere we want the council to be open 24/7, where people can come in and use the space downstairs? Because it's tough to have an open door where anyone can walk in and then tell people, no, you can't go and sit downstairs, but if you want to go upstairs to a meeting room where a meeting's ongoing, you can do that. So I think then happy to have a conversation on where that sits, but that I think needs to be a wider discussion there, because I don't want to say let's have an open door where anyone can walk in, but we'll then have someone there saying, well, you can do that, you can't do that. I think the next one was on to human resources. Lots of internal communication. We've really ramped that up because there is all sorts of messages flying around with everything that's going on, but even before that, whether it's stuff they pick up in the media or hearsay, that we're making sure there is constant communication on what is fact coming out from internally. I think the next one was communications. I think we've made significant strides. I know Councillor Coxall holds regular cabinet briefings where the media are invited. Obviously, we would love to see more of the media attend, but having worked in that world, they're incredibly short-staffed, so being able to attend meetings isn't as free to all of them as I'm sure they would like on their end, having spoke to them in the past. So we are making more progress. Everything seems to be a lot more positive towards communications. Yes, is it exactly where I want to be? No, we'll continue to move forward, but there seems to just be a significant step forward in the last, how long? 180 days? Yeah, 2 months? 90 days. 90 days. So I feel there is significant progress being made there. And then hearing loop. I'll be honest, when everything to go with building the council, I was in opposition. But it's one that I think we definitely need to look at that, what can be done. So happy to take that away and ask the question, because I think it's a very, very fair question. So I'll take that back, and then when I get a response, I'll send that through. Voter ID.
Sorry, it's John Jones, the monitoring officer. I was going to preempt about voter ID. If you don't mind, I can give you a bit more information.
Yep. Yes, please, John.
Yeah, just to give you some information, the regulations regarding voter ID have very recently been published. So recently, we are still going through the regulations. We intend to hold an all-member briefing once we're aware of what they are.
Sorry, John, just for a second.
Sorry, this is for members to question the portfolio holder, not for officers to barge in and try to take over, frankly.
Okay.
I'd like to know what the policy is and how that policy is going to be rolled out to make sure we get voter ID given to members of the public free of charge.
I say no more then, if that's the case.
It's information we're relying on the government to release, so for me to announce what's going on before the government have fully announced everything, how it will all work, there'll be a members briefing? An all-members briefing in January to go more into it, but no, that's all I can say at the moment on this one. I think that was all your questions. By all means, if there was any missed, please let me know.
No, I will just come back to access to the building. We're not talking about having a building open 24/7. We're talking about having a building that's accessible to the public so they can come in and observe council meetings and council committee meetings, which is entirely different. If there is a real concern about people coming in and wandering over the building, then frankly the building should have been designed in a different way. But people have a right to be able to come in and watch what we're doing without having to bang on doors and try to attract people's attention. And I'd like to know when that's going to be rectified.
That's certainly something I'll raise every time when I've arrived through the front door for a meeting. There has always been someone there. So that's just from my experience. Obviously, if that's not the case, then that's certainly something I'm willing to take away and find out why that wasn't the case.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kent. I agree with Councillor Kent. It feels sometimes like I've had a tap on the window, and if I was a member of the public, I probably wouldn't be inclined to do that. to gain access to this building. I think it should be much more open to the public. I completely agree with Councillor Kent. Just to touch on what you said earlier before I go to Councillor Tandy, you described what sounded a bit like a ticketing system. I spend hours of my day overseeing ticketing systems. What I'm worried about, and Councillor Maney brought it up at Cabinet, is that councillors should never be in I don't think, personally, a position where we should be just, when inquiries come to us from residents, that we should be saying to that resident, go and fill in this form online. I think there's got to be room there for the human interaction, and that also means residents being able to pick up the phone, because lots of residents won't have either the broadband or the data and things like that, or the equipment, and they still need to pick up the phone and actually engage with officers and make sure that their concerns are met and they get feedback in a two-way process. So just wanted to add that and see what you thought of that, please, Councillor Duffin.
No, 100%. And the way I would like it to work, whether it's coming from a resident's perspective and wanting to engage with the council, at the moment you've got inboxes galore and it's messy. I won't shy away from that. What I would much rather have, if a resident wants to engage with the council, a simple contact form that had which department do you want this to go to, a drop down, obviously options there that if they don't know, that's perfectly fine. Do they want to CC someone in? Because at the moment it's very binary. It's one-to-one contact, whereas you might be a resident putting something in on behalf of a resident that wants to be kept in the loop but might not be tech savvy, that they can be CC'd in so they can at least see what's going on. And then that also speeds up the process, because at the moment that email goes in and then someone physically has to deal with it and send it on. Well, that's a delay that we could easily cut out to make the system more efficient. And then from a councillor perspective, rather than something comes in forward into members' inquiries, well, we could speed that up, and if you want to put residents in as a CC, if you want to sort of mention where that's ending up, I think that's all incredible amount of efficiency, where if it's going to help me get a response to my resident a day earlier because I press a drop down of which area of the council I want this message to go to, I think that's beneficial. It doesn't say that's the only way to people to communicate, we're going to turn off the phones. It's not about that. It's about getting that information, whether it's to a councillor, to a resident, much, much quicker. And I think the fact that that's not in place doesn't achieve what we want. So it's not about shutting communication channels. I just want to see a more efficient communication flow. And having worked in ticketing systems, probably not quite as much as yourself, but every tech startup I've worked with had ticketing systems. They do speed it up. And also it's the transparency, because I find it incredibly frustrating when you email a company and you're just a whim of like, have they contacted? Have they just forgot about? Have they closed it? You can log in and you can see how many inquiries you've got. Are they open? Are they closed? What's going on with them? And that sort of transparency, I think, really helps, because as a resident, you know what's going on, rather than the whole, I think they've just forgot about me.
I appreciate those points. I think it could work and can work, but it needs to be done in a very tactful and delicate manner, and not just, Friday's one system, Monday's something completely different, and everyone's got to change the way they work and how they work and the information flows around the systems, because that would just probably prove a disaster. So it needs to be a gradual process, two systems overlapping one over the other, and take all that into account. I'd like to know a lot more information on it as it comes through in the future. Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Duffin, what I do get all the time asked is old value face-to-face. Would that be an option like it was before, or are we just going all technology?
I think there's a big push to technology, just because just staffing cost, efficiency, and where the world is at. You can't have a whole 20, 30 people sat downstairs all the time just dealing with walk-ins and wherever that happens. So I think there is a balance of the people that need it will make sure there's stuff there, but at times it's almost over facilitating lots of people sat there, not being able to, they're there to wait for people to walk in. If people don't walk in, then it's just wasted resource. So I think it's an important balancing act, because we don't want to turn that off as a system where people can't have face-to-face interactions. But it's also not the most efficient channel, if I'm going to be honest. So it's making sure the option's there without making it the predominant, don't bother picking up the phone, come down to the council, or don't send an email, don't bother picking up the phone, come down to the council. It's just not the way the world's going. And I think it's keeping the option open but not making it the primary communication channel.
Councillor Carter, then Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to, it was a few points ago that I had my hand up after, what Councillor Kent and Councillor Massey were saying about how it sends the wrong message with the doors being locked, etc. Democratic engagement is always going to be a difficult thing. And actually, the last few committees we have had a visitor or two, but that certainly isn't the case, and that is quite a rarity. Is there anything you're doing in your portfolio to increase democratic engagement, or let people know that they can come to committees, or they can visit?
Yeah, I don't know the data in terms of how many people watch all the videos. Obviously, whether you go onto YouTube and anyone could look at the numbers, but there are people engaging digitally to a meeting, because if you can sit at home and watch the same meeting rather than travelling from Stamford, for instance, to drive here 15 minutes to then drive home, if you're not going there to engage and speak, it's making sure that it's available for someone. And even if you want to listen to it 2 days later, you can go on and listen. So it's one that understanding the world sort of changing from the aspect of, I need to physically be there, to it's on-demand TV, it's on-demand everything these days. The question is, do people want to turn up to a council meeting and listen? And there's lots of people, the answer is no. And we see that trend, whether it's turnouts in elections, and that's on all of us, with people going out, banging on doors and asking people to go out and vote, and still turnout is in a negative direction, generally over a wider span. So it's not one where I would say if focus is there, it's driving people to register to vote rather than, do you want to turn up to a committee meeting? I would say that it wouldn't be a great use of resource to make that a campaign focus wider. As an organisation, I'd rather get people registered to vote if there's anything within the democratic process, because the more people that are on with the option to vote on polling day, hopefully that will then incentivise them to vote and engage.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in projects the integrated medical centres and that has been provided an IT solution that enables multiple agencies to work from a single site. Can you provide a bit more detail on what that IT solution looks like practically? And you mentioned an ambitious agenda, which I assume includes some of these projects listed on page 20. How is the Council's financial position going to impact that ambitious agenda and the projects that you mentioned throughout your report?
So I'd touch on the full inner workings of the hubs isn't something that you're probably best aiming that towards health. We've provided them the IT facilities to make sure that they can deliver what they need to deliver, whereas the Health Committee and Health Portfolio Holder is probably better placed to go into what are they using that for and what they're delivering. And then, does the financial impact, financial position of the council? Yes. Do I have details on where that is and what that is yet at this time? No, it's far too early for that. So, as the Leader of the Council and the Finance Portfolio Holders regularly said, we're not taking everything off the table, what's on, what's off the table. It's still a time where discussions are ongoing, so I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that everything that's happened in the past will happen in the future. It's one where we need to make the decisions at the time rather than, I could give you empty promises, but they would be empty promises.
Thank you. And then my next question, following on from some points made around residents being able to get in touch with the council. I find that it is quite difficult to kind of get a resident to be able to speak to someone, and the process that you outline with regards to a tech startup we're not a tech startup. We deal with people that have real life issues that need, and often complex. So how this system work practically? You talked about an email coming through and then being sent to the right person. Well, what if the person has issues with housing, with social care, with education? Who splits off that email? And how does that work? How do they not fall through the gaps on any of the things that they need help with? Because walk-ins would have helped that. When you're dealing with someone face to face, they can deal with the complexity of that issue, which can't be dealt with over email. And secondly, are you concerned, and how might you mitigate some of the concerns with regards to a workforce is needed to reply to the emails quickly? If it is likely to be a reduction in the workforce, we don't know what that will be yet. How will that mean that residents are going to get answers to their emails very quickly?
So it's not about replacing face-to-face meetings with a ticketing system. It's about replacing an email system that is outdated in a world where if you are setting up a large organisation, you are not going, let's have loads of email inboxes and just see what happens. It's just not an efficient way to work in the 21st century. So an organisation like Zendesk works with local government as well as tech startups, and there is lots of information that the world can use to improve efficiency and get people transparency and information. So it's not one of just going, right, you can't have a face-to-face meeting, you've got to submit a ticket. It's not about that. It's about changing the digital way of working, of don't send an email to contact@thurrock.com or org or whichever organisation or /bins or wherever you go. It's about making it really easy for someone to go, oh, I don't need to know the whichever direction you need to go. Oh, I just go to this contact form and it's in. And it's a single door where people can get the help they need, whether they would be submitting that. Obviously, there's still phone numbers, there's still everything else. This isn't the only direction to go. But an email address that goes to contact@Thurrock, why is that less efficient if that goes through a contact form that rather than go to an inbox goes directly where it needs to go, and then the resident can log in online and see where that's gone and what's progressing? So I think it's about understanding that this isn't replacing a phone system, this is replacing an outdated email system using modern technology.
Sorry, I mean, maybe I'm not tech savvy enough. So I understand that it goes into one inbox, but in the example that I gave, it goes into an inbox. That's understandable. From there, there's multiple concerns. One email then gets sent to 3 people? How does the person then know which area, who's dealing with what? Who's dealing with education? Who's dealing with housing? Who's dealing with the social care issue? How are they kept updated on that? How is that? I mean, I know it's a single entry point. I want to know where it goes after that. What's the journey after that?
That's a whole piece of work that is ongoing. But if someone currently sends an email to bins@Thurrock, and then that contains issues to do with health, to do with housing, in the same way, how does that achieve what you said? It doesn't, because it's about making sure there's ways, and ticketing systems are great for bouncing stuff to other departments and moving things around. So it's just rather than the current system, which would be an email forwarded from bins to housing to health and wherever that would go, that was what would currently happen at the moment, to making that much more efficient and able to, you can duplicate, you can clone, you can do loads of different tools to get answers quicker. But it's about moving to the tools that are going to help residents get an answer quicker. And lots of the examples you gave were about phones and things like that. It's not about replacing that.
Sorry, could you also answer the question with regarding a reduced workforce and how making sure that people get timely responses?
Ticketing system versus an email system is more efficient, and that in its own right has nothing to do with a workforce. If you had a workforce of 1 million and a workforce of 1 person, that 1 person's time is going to be more efficiently spent answering and dealing with cases rather than forward on to this person, forward on to that person. In the same way, if I want to submit an inquiry about bins, I don't want to go to members' inquiries and then someone has to physically send that on to someone else and then pat myself on the back that that's an efficient use of that person's time. I would much rather be able to fill in a form about bins that then goes to that department and that is then being worked on, because rather than the however long of a delay you've just inserted, you're more likely to get the issue raised. So I think it's just about efficiency and delivering for our residents rather than bureaucracy, in all honesty, because the less bureaucracy, the better.
Any other questions for the members of the committee? Councillor Duffin? I can't see any indication. Oh, thank you, Councillor Duffin. I think this talk of the system could almost be a whole report on its own. And could we get some sort of commitment that it would come back to a committee in the future before we engage in any tenders or contracts?
More than happy to. It's not one that is 2 weeks' time something's going to get rolled out. This is very much the digital strategy, the ambition, the longer term plan. So I'm more than happy to bring that back. Can I just check on things that were requested, so I take everything away? There was the request from Councillor Carter about the data for open rates over a period of time. There was a request from Councillor Kent about open door at the front and how we deal with that. Can I just check there wasn't any other requests for me to take stuff and feedback, just so nothing gets missed?
There was the lack of a hearing loop.
Thank you very much.
And the full fibre rollout plans as well, especially in rural areas. Anyone else got anything to add before we move to the recommendation? So the recommendation on page 19 is 1.1, that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the report and ask the Cabinet Member any related questions. I believe we've covered that. Is that recommendation in agreement by the committee? That's agreed. Thank you, Councillor Duffin. As we have Councillor Duffin in the room, I'm going to move the agenda around slightly so he can be present for what would have been agenda item 8, the Corporate Peer Challenge 2022 update, which is found on pages 85 to 118 on the agenda. Can I ask Sarah Walton to present the report, please?
Sorry, Councillor, it's me, Karen Wheeler, I'm afraid.
Karen Wheeler.
Thank you. So, yes, the Council undertook a Corporate Peer Challenge in January 2022, so led by the Local Government Association with a team of officer and member peers from different local authorities. They met with staff members and partners to inform their reports, which we received in spring earlier this year. An action plan was developed on receipt of that report, and both the report and the action plan were published on the Council's website in June 2022. Obviously, as we're all acutely aware, come September we entered into government intervention, and as part of that process and that requirement, we need to develop an improvement and recovery plan. So we have looked at the peer review and reflected on that and the action plan, and although clearly some progress has been made in terms of some of the elements of the Corporate Peer Challenge action plan, we have reflected that in the improvement and recovery plan. Some of the themes are similar, and that will be part of an ongoing process. So to a certain extent, the peer review process has now been kind of superseded and subsumed into where we are now and that wider improvement and recovery plan. That plan will be shared with members in the new year, and there will be further iterations of that, particularly once we receive the outcome of the best value inspection and also the Commissioner's report alongside that, and response from the Secretary of State. So it will be an iterative process, and as I said, a number of the themes from the peer review clearly will link into that. So any feedback from the committee this evening on the peer report will be fed into that process. And as I said, and I think the leaders made the commitment publicly that improvement plan will be shared with all members and taken to a future full council meeting. So happy to answer any questions on the peer report and the action plan, and as I said, kind of to a certain extent superseded by the position we're currently in. Thank you.
Thank you for your report. If I could start with a question. Having read through the report, and there's quite a few occasions where it says that the council was almost putting its hand up in the air too often or taking the lead on some larger projects, and almost damaging the reputation with third parties and stakeholders by taking too much on. Can you tell me what's changed since this report was published in respect to improving that situation with stakeholders?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think there are some really good examples of where we work really well with partners and have taken the lead. So most recently, things like developing the health and wellbeing strategy, implementation of the Backing Thurrock, so the economic development strategy, partnerships such as the Thames Freeport. So I think there are some really positive examples of that partnership working. I think clearly, as is reflected in the report, and as you've said, we have been hugely ambitious. We have a significant number of kind of major projects, and as part of this review, and clearly the position we find ourselves in now, there's an opportunity to really review and reprioritise some of those, and recognise that sometimes we may not be best placed to lead some of those pieces of work. And I think there are examples with voluntary sector organisations, with private sector businesses, where we are partners, and we have a kind of community leadership role in that, but we are not necessarily best placed to lead that work going on. So I think that's part of an ongoing sort of reflection, really, and prioritisation of where we are now. And I think, as was set out in the peer review, we have a different approach with different projects, different partners. So we haven't necessarily set out what type of relationship and what type of council we want to be. And I think we will see that come through as we reflect on a new corporate plan and priorities in the new year.
Can I open up to members' questions, members of the committee? Councillor Kent.
Not so much a question really as a comment. You know, a lot of members gave a lot of time to speak to the team when they were in Thurrock back in January. There was interim feedback, an interim report, which is a report that we've got here, that was given to the council in January. Yet I was still having to go through the FOI process in June and July to get a copy of this. And I just don't understand why any local authority would go to the effort to commission a peer review like this and then keep it hidden. And the fact is that if I hadn't put a resolution to council asking for this to come before members, we still wouldn't be discussing it now. And we're a year on. And as we've heard from Ms Wheeler, this has now been superseded. This is out of date. Much of this will be included in the improvement and recovery plan. But I guess if there is a question, it's in two parts. Why was this kept away from members for so long? And can we have some confidence that when we have another similar peer review, as we undoubtedly will do, to measure the progress we're making as we come out of the current crisis, I'd like a guarantee that actually members will be owning whatever report comes out and owning any improvement plan that comes out. Because frankly, if not, it's never going to work. There's no self-awareness through this organisation. And the way this has been handled just demonstrates that in droves.
Karen, would you like to come back? Councillor Coxwell wishes to come in. Happy with that?
I actually completely agree with Councillor Kent. I think that the way this was not, and I apologise for that. I'm not a leader now. That won't happen under my leadership. I immediately accepted the motion because it was delayed from July to I think it was a superseded and couldn't come here. It should have come here. It should have been here as quick as possible. As I said in Cabinet last night, the problem we've got to do is we were too good, the Council was too good to talk about good news all the time and try and hide bad news. The only way this Council can improve is actually publish the bad news, bring it into ONS to do the job what this is. This is to look at, scrutinise what's going wrong, to actually improve. If we can't have a good ONS, we can't actually have a good Council. And one of the things is the most important thing. The finances are one thing. We talk about that in a little while, and I think that's facts and figures. And yes, no, we can get over that and by that. What we can't with the cultural change, and you talk about culture change and all the stuff, but it's actually, I don't know. I'm trying to find a different word to culture change. The culture of secrecy here has got to stop, and that's what I want to do. And if it's one thing I can, that's the finances are colossal, and it's very hard for me to find that sort of money and that. But I can change a culture of the leadership team in this area, and in this building, and that's the bit at the top to actually make sure the confidence to lower to normal staff working on the front lines have got to start to actually do the work and be trustworthy to their senior bosses, and the members in here in this room have got able to challenge and make sure we improve this council and bring it to a better, open and trustworthy council. And that's got to become it. We've got to accept that it was terrible, and I accept it was terrible. And if I was there, I'm sorry it's there. I feel really bad every day this didn't come as quick as possible and should have come as soon as we had it. I appeared in there, went there, I'm spending hours going through that, and we need to see it as soon as possible, and everyone to see it. And the better we look at bad news, the easier we can improve, and we shouldn't hide bad news away.
Councillor Kent, are you happy with that answer, or would you like to respond?
No, I'd take the answer at face value. That if Councillor Cockshall had been in the leader's role back in January, that this would have seen the light of day almost immediately, and we could have made some progress. I just reiterate the point that there's little purpose in commissioning people to come in, carry out a review, and then hide what they say. It just seems absolutely crazy. So I am grateful for the answer.
Just before I go to Councillor Duffin, I spent quite a long time as well on when this peer review was being produced, and when I read back on it, it feels like it's another time in the past. I know things in the current day have changed very quickly, but it feels like it's such a long time ago, and that devalues the report. And we really need to improve on that and make sure that we actually are acting on this information that's been a lot of hard work. Like Councillor Kent just goes into these peer reviews, and we need to make sure we act on it in a timely manner. Councillor Cockshall, then Councillor Duffin.
Just talk about, and I'm sorry we can't bring the work we've been working with the officers about the recovery plan, but that's got to go to the Secretary of State first, and then we will, and that's only an initiative, like we said. I think it's too long a word, that. So it's an evolving paper, and until it comes, and I would love this paper, the recovery plan, to turn into a corporate plan to make sure we can actually strive and deliver these, and there's key objectives, so we can keep that. And that's what we really got to get to. And as soon as the Secretary of State that comes to after Christmas, I think everyone involved in this, and if you give the time that we gave to that into the recovery plan, I think it's really important. That's the bit we can do ourselves in this room, and people in our staff and the presidents would appreciate to show that there is a recovery plan, and we've got to then stick to it. And it's not going to happen in 2 weeks. People say changes of culture at the top of the leadership of this, on both members and senior officers, takes years. And that's what we've got to get, and we've got to bring trust back. And I think the recovery plan will give us that, and they'll give a better opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Cockshall. Councillor Duffin.
Yeah, I'd like to say, when I was on this committee, Councillor Gerrish was the chair, and there was lots of times where we pushed on the work plan and demanded stuff. And if it ever comes up that there is requests for stuff on the work plan, and the committee is being told no by officers, please raise it to myself and Councillor Cockshall, because we won't hesitate to push as hard as we can to get stuff here. So if the requests are going in, because this committee, it's not just what officers set as the initial annual list of stuff is what it can do. There is wider scope where things can be pushed and demanded and asked for. So don't hesitate. And if the answer is no, you can't have that, by all means reach out to myself and Councillor Cockshall, and we'll do everything we can to make sure information comes here. Obviously naturally, but hey, there is always going to be things where we want more information and ask for more, push the boundaries, and we'll continue to see what we can do to bring information as quickly to here as possible.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. The Chair appreciates that, and I'm sure we will take that on board and take up that offer if and when needed. Thank you. Looking around the room, see if members have questions on this. No, I can't see any. So if we could move on to the recommendations that are on page 86 of the agenda. 1.1, note the outcomes of the LGA Corporate Peer Challenge in January 2022 and the actions part of a wider response to the best value inspection and intervention process. And 1.2, feedback on any areas which the committee members feel should be focused in the future, iterations of improvement recovery plan. I believe we have done that. Can I see agreement for those recommendations, please? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine Dustin. You're free to go, as they say. Thank you. Moving on to what was item 6, the financial update quarter 2 for 2022/23 on pages 39 to 76. We're allowing an hour for this item. Can I please ask Jonathan Wilson to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Starting on page 39, I think it's important to note in paragraph 3, this is a grave position. It's clearly stated there, and it's stated because the figure above it is a £469 million deficit being reflected for the current year, and a further £184 million deficit for the subsequent year. And that £469 million figure almost entirely relates to investment-related balances. And Table 1 sets out on page 40 the breakdown of that position, and confirms that 467 million broadly of that 469 is a combination of a write-down of investments, a further write-down for prudence, to ensure that the value of investments are correctly reflected in the financial statements, and then further losses relating to investment income, and that relates to prior years and the current year. So a huge figure to reflect on, and we've got very limited mitigation, which is also in the table, which brings it down to 452. What that means for the council is we will request exceptional financial support from government. That conversation is ongoing, and we will inevitably issue the Section 114 notice, and that will be before Christmas, almost certainly. So those two things in itself are significant, but the report itself, the most significant figure is the write-down of the assets. I think most members are familiar with the reason for that. We've had valuations on 4 specific investments, and the most significant of those is the solar investments of the council, and that's where we find ourselves. The further provision is to ensure we are compliant with the Prudential Code, and actually we're forward compliant with the new Prudential Code, which is coming in from the 1st of April, almost certainly 24. And essentially it's meaning we're writing down investments over their lives, and that ensures that write-down has happened in advance. If we had any further issues with investments, we are therefore then protected to the extent we've written them down. So that's providing us with a level of prudent protection on top of the write-down of value that relates to the current value as we understand it today. And I say as we understand it today because there is a long way to run, particularly on the solar investments, and this position is very much a quantification of all of the issues. This is not a quantification of any mitigation at this point in time. So this is us accepting this grave position, understanding it, and this then forms the basis for further discussion with government, further discussion with commissioners, and an ongoing dialogue to seek resolution to these issues going forward. In terms of the current year, that request will go in probably in the next week or so, and we met with government today, and they're familiar with the figures. They've had this report for a week or so now, and we're engaged in that conversation. going into page 41, I think it is, sorry, 41, the MTFS position is kind of equally as worrying in some senses, because there's obviously identifying a problem that we can then seek to fix in 1 year. The ongoing impact of holding investments, and again, this is on the assumed basis that we are holding these investments. We haven't yet divested of them, and I'll come on to that in a second. But if we continue to hold them, there's three significant figures at the bottom of the second table, or the table on page 41, which are investment and interest adjustments, MRP, and the write-down of the exceptional support we asked for in the current year, which combines 167 million that is in addition to our normal operational budget. The obvious solution to that ongoing issue is to divest of the investments. That then significantly reduces the interest cost. It takes away ultimately the MRP cost. But to the extent that doesn't happen, whether it's next year or the year after, we continue to have those significant balances and we'll need to seek additional support. So clearly we are looking at a divestment strategy that is ongoing, and the most significant initial step in that process is that the administration applying to the Toucan assets is ongoing, and I can tell the committee that that is progressing. There is the administrators have appointed KPMG to lead on the sale of those assets, and that process is in progress and is expected to happen within 2 years of administration. But obviously we hope that happens more quickly, and that will take away, at the current value we're showing it at, a significant proportion of that issue. So that would bring significantly down the MRP and interest cost. However, we've still got a time to run. The administration's only a few weeks in progress, but it's good to note that there is significant progress already. The other thing, just to go on to, these figures are the significant figures in this report, but it is detracting slightly from the underlying issues we already had. So we already had temporary measures to manage our budget in the current year, and as we go through the report, you will see in the tables we are supporting that through reserves, through transformation funding and capital receipts. And we were in a really difficult position at the start of this year before the significant investment issues. So it's important to note that. It's also important to consider that in the future of action taken to address these issues, because it's not just these issues. What we need to be able to demonstrate to commissioners and government ultimately is that we can become a sustainable council, and that includes looking at our levels of reserves, looking at our operating deficits, and just looking at how we fund these things over time. I just wanted to draw attention specifically to Commissioner comments on page 42. They have heavy involvement in this report. They're aware of the position. We've agreed this report with them. And they obviously reiterate some of the things I've said. They note we cannot balance the budget. They note the position on reserves. We will be significantly reduced in our reserve levels at the end of the year. And they note also that there's further work to do on investments. And some of that additional work on the tail of investments, as we call it, the further 256 million, is happening, and there are definitely an issue on at least one other investment. It is not a significant figure in the context of where we are, but it will be an additional amount to consider at Q3. But that's attaching to one of the remaining tail, and that's the only significant issue identified, and it's significant just in the context of its own value, which is much, much smaller than the numbers we're talking about here. Further work will be done on that. It comes back through to the Financial Reporting Board that the Commissioners and the Council operate together. Commissioners are also noting there's further work to do to look at the HRA, to look at subsidiary companies, and it's an ongoing process, and that's very much the other point to make. This is iterative. Q3, we will come back with updated figures, but we think most of the significant issues and investments are here. There will be some smaller changes to that. The wider, we don't know what's going to come through when they review further items on, the HRA and companies. The dialogue's ongoing. They've got some oversight of that, but it's obviously we're just about 3 months from the intervention point. A huge amount has had to be addressed, and particularly around some of the investments. And we're obviously moving into a space now where we're talking about that future sustainability question with government. We then have to consider, on top of that, the BVI impacts to come. So the next thing I just wanted to touch on was the recommendations themselves. And we've worked with commissioners to ensure members are aware of the recommendations that are coming forward to Cabinet. And just to note, Cabinet have deferred their meeting on this report to accommodate your comments tonight and make sure that feedback is incorporated in their meeting next week. Obviously, there's some standard points in there, noting the funding gap, noting the need for support, and the MTFS position. The other things I was just going to flag was they've noted the use of reserves. They've also noted we need to discuss further with external audit on our write-down of investments. That meeting is in progress to be set up, and obviously they want to seek assurance from the auditors that our write-down of investments is reasonable. My starting point for that, and I can't predict what their comments will be, is we are taking a very prudent approach, and I would expect that to be considered to be robust, but we will bring back any further comments should they have them, and we'll bring that back as part of Q3. It also then goes on to note the position on the capital programme and our schools funding, which are also things that are going on. We don't want to lose those in the mix of the bigger news in this report, but I'm just flagging them for members so that they're aware those items are here as well, in the way they normally would be with an operational report that we normally bring at this time of year. So I'll just pause there and just let members lead where we want to go and discuss on this report. I think that, the significant things I've highlighted, but there's a range of items in this report, and I'll leave that with members, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think all members have had good sight of this report, which is good. Just before I go to questions, I know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Has anything changed since the publication of this report and current day where we are now that we should be aware of in this committee?
So that tail of investment review is ongoing, but it's at an early stage, and we've got an indication that one investment may have lost some value, but we are verifying the position on that, and we will bring that back as part of that tail review of investment. What I would expect is when we get to Q3, we've covered all the investments, so we can bring back a complete picture then. But we've certainly focused on the significant items to date. So there will be changes, there will be fluctuations in this. I mean, ultimately, as long as we are holding investments, they need to be under constant assessment. But in terms of where we targeted, obviously we targeted the solar asset particularly, but the other problematic assets at the start of this process, and we've got a view on all of it, but obviously we want to verify that tail fully. So we'll come back with that. In terms of wider action, there's a constant dialogue with commissioners and the department, and that's partly so there's complete transparency for them, partly so they're engaged in the discussion on ultimately how this is recovered. And as I say, there was discussions today. The next phase of this is to understand how an MTFS looks going forward, firstly across 5 to 6 years, because if we have a divestment strategy which brings in investments and capital assets, that's not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years. We will obviously seek to accelerate it as far as possible. But what we want to see is what does the council look like in terms of finances once that divestment process has ended, and where does that leave us? And the initial starting point is we will not fully meet currently with the plans in place the capital gap, so we need to look at that, and that's ongoing. And if you didn't meet the capital gap, you were potentially going to get in a situation where you're seeking capitalisation on previous capitalisation directions. So we're just trying to navigate that kind of scenario. And what the department want is discussions about what potential solutions there are to that. And obviously they bring their experience from other authorities to that conversation. Commissioners bring their experience. And we are modelling scenarios essentially to do that. We will come back as soon as we've got to a position where we agree at least our support for next year and the current year. But that longer term sustainability question remains live as we work through that.
Thank you for the answer. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the talking us through the report in a bit more detail. I'm going to go through a few questions, if it's okay. With regards to the reserves, it says that the reserves are significantly reduced and at current balances present a further risk to future sustainability. Can you talk us through in more detail what this means practically and what it might mean for the future plans of Council? With regard, you mentioned the HRA. Again, some more detail on the review of subsidiary companies and loans to these companies, and also was full due diligence carried out when entering into contracts with PHI, and are you confident that the millions of RTB money is secure? Housing one. There's on page 46 under the table key forecast variances at Q2. We talk about assumptions have been made that there will be no other significant variances within the central financing or other corporate cost allocations. What is this assumption based on, and what happens if the assumption isn't correct, and implications for that? Sorry, Chair, is it okay if I just continue with one
I
third?
think this is such an important thing. We need
With
to
one
get all our
further.
questions
Okay,
tonight.
thank you. And then on page 48, 3.11, it notes that the external audit review remains outstanding and the opening reserve position is subject to change. Again, I know there's a lot of variation, but what it could mean if, because the current reserves is based on unaudited balances. So I'll leave it there for now, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry. Starting with the reserves question. So obviously the reserves position set out significantly reduces us down. We're just above a general fund reserve of the 11 million which was recommended. We've got very little financial resilience beyond that. So given the situation we're in, given our exposure to investment specifically, if we carry that ongoing balance, we have got significant further exposure to running down reserves. And we've seen other councils where they've actually ended up with negative reserves. So there is that risk. The conversation with commissioners is very much around building back the reserves as part of the recovery. So what we will do to achieve that is set a reserve strategy, which we will work on alongside the recovery work, to achieve what is considered to be an appropriate level of reserves. And that will need to consider the transformation that the council needs to address and take place. So to the extent we need to transform, we need funds in which to do so, and we need to create a reserve to achieve that. So essentially it's that making that sustainable decision making possible by creating those reserves. So that's where that's heading, but as it currently stands, as we go into next year on this, we are facing significant further exposure as set out. In terms of the HRA and subsidiary companies, so the HRA as a capital asset has been subject to speculation and consideration as part of this process. That is being looked at by an independent consultant. The initial assessment of that I've looked at in terms of the first view suggests that the business plan attached to the HRA is significant, and there's further work to do to assess if there is value in that, and I mean capital value that supports our position or not. And I think it's very much in the economic climate and with the requirements to support housing going forward and the needs of those housing, I think it's going to be a significant cost. I'm not sure that is going to provide a capital solution to the problem. But we will need to work through that, assess that when the report is fully assessed, and work through that with commissioners. So in terms of subsidiary companies, obviously our subsidiaries are TRL and TRHL, so that currently there's one major project, the St Chad's project, and the housing there is planned to be divested of in a period of time. That was their business model. That then funds the outstanding loan back to the council. So the assessment commissioners will want to make is that still paying back its loan? Is there any exposure beyond that? We don't think that's the case today, but obviously housing markets are moving, interest rates are moving, it's a constant moving target again, and obviously we need to keep that under assessment, so that will happen. I haven't got the detail on the due diligence on fire, so I wasn't obviously we don't cover that in the report. I'll come back to you separately on that point. Sorry, your final. Oh, there was the one. The central financing and corporate cost was one, wasn't it?
Yeah, the assumption.
Yeah.
Significant variances. Yeah.
So central finance, I think, is referencing. So our budget is built on broadly 20% of investment income. So to the extent we're experiencing these issues that we're reflecting, obviously that can get worse further, and that could potentially be an issue. On the corporate cost side, one of the costs we've now experiencing is intervention costs. We've got 1.5 million in there for this year, 2 million for next year, but that 2 million is going to expand because our capacity requirements to deliver our improvement recovery plan will be significant. And it will be short-term resource to fix a problem, essentially, via the longer-term savings we may have to make. But we need to have the capacity, obviously, to meet those requirements of commissioners and department and create what they consider a sustainable council. So that additional cost is, of the 1.7 operating deficit that's reflected in this report, 1.5 is that additional cost that's come in as a result. And sorry, though, I think you had one final point, Councillor.
It was the implications. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, it was the implications. Our external audit review remains outstanding. So
yes, sorry, right, yes. So inevitably what will happen in terms of the audit is an assessment will be made of when the issues have arisen. They will, I think, inevitably link back into prior years, going back as far as potentially 17, 18, if not before that. The mechanism for auditors to look at that is our 2021 accounts are open, and to the extent they want to reassess previous periods and think there is a requirement to do so, to the extent there's a loss that attaches to a year at the prior, so we've got 2021 open, we'll have 1920 as a comparator, and they can create a third balance sheet, which is effectively the year before. So you can go right back to 1819. And we are certified up to 1920 accounts. So my expectation would be that adjustment would be made in that first balance sheet, then the second, and then the third, as appropriate. That will obviously have an impact on reserves. That will play through, and we will have to resolve the technical accounting for all of that. And there's two things here. There's what we're presenting tonight is when we've identified an issue and reported it to you in a management accounts format, and then there's the technical assessment of that places it back in the right period. Obviously, we're asking for support at this point based on this management accounts position because this is when we've identified it, and this is when the support will be needed. But that piece of technical work, as I've said in a number of forums now, I think, it is an exceptionally complicated piece of work, and it obviously requires judgments from auditors about when information was available and what that indicated about the financial statements in each given period. We will work with them to make that assessment, but the complexity of them working that through the accounts and into the reserves and all the other statements that connect to that is going to significantly impact on our open set of accounts already, which were delayed. So we just need to manage members' expectations that there's a very complicated piece of work to clear those accounts ultimately.
Councillor Holloway, do you want to come back on a particular point?
Just one follow-up on that. Bearing in mind you've described a situation that really as you say, it's today's position, but in 3 months' time, I mean, in 2 weeks' time, it could be completely different. And I guess factoring in the corporate costs, you talk about commissioner costs for year 1 and year 2. How many? I mean, that's probably really a conservative estimate. How long really do you think that we will be living with this kind of system and really kind of managing the real scale of all of the complexity that you've outlined?
So it's hard to answer at the moment, but the model starting point in terms of the finances is at that point we've done everything we can do, which is we've divested of the assets we think are reasonable to do so, which takes us to currently, in the way we're modelling it, 27.8, 28.9. Because at that point, if we've divested of all our assets and addressed the capital issues we can address, and we've made savings along the way to transform our council, we are at a point of assessment where we need that conversation with the department to fully understand what our sustainability position looks like. So it's a minimum financially of that, and it's probably much longer. We will model an MCFS probably for 30 years. But the key actions we take will happen in that first period.
Thank you.
I will allow extra time for this item, as I think it's so important, and I think that Cabinet have deferred it for us to hear it here first is the right process. I've got Councillor Arnold and Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. First, thank you for the report, Jonathan. And I would like to say, actually, I've managed to pin you down, didn't I, very recently, and I've had myself quite a comprehensive sit down and go through the report, and it gave me a far greater understanding of actually what goes on and what this report is about. But I would say, I mean, it does leave me with the thought that the wording, the terminology and explanation in the reports are still very complicated. I'm not a financial expert. I'm trying to obtain great knowledge or greater knowledge as best I possibly can. I think if the report was written clearer and better, it would be far greater for other members to understand and actually then be able to ask questions and have a real good understanding of what actually is happening. And at the same time, I would actually urge, if there are any members out there that do feel they need a greater understanding, to really contact yourself and get that briefing done. If I can just come now into just 2 questions, please. The first one is, what reassurance can you give that we'll be able to continue to provide our statutory services? And just going on page 48, it's 3.1 and 3.12 and 3.13. 3.12 states that it's mandatory for the council to comply with the Prudential Code, yet in 3.13 it says we have not been doing that. When was it first realised that the code wasn't being followed, and what actions did the responsible officer take to remedy it?
Thank you, Chair. And just on the point on clarity, appreciate the complexity, and we have sought the briefing sessions. Obviously, it's part of trying to explain it. We've also got some Q&A on our website to explain some of the terminology. So just for everyone's benefit to know that's available. So I'll come to your last point. You might have to remind me because there's lots of questions tonight. But so in terms of the Prudential Code, we've got 2 Prudential Codes that have been in place while this strategy has been followed, and there's a third coming which we're now complying with early, effectively, through the write-down we've reflected in the report tonight. In the first iteration of the Prudential Code, I think we were within the rules. And I think what happened was then the rules were changed in the second iteration. And I think the second iteration is where there then becomes issues with how the write-down of investments has not been made until the point we're at here, where we're now rectifying that and retrospectively treating it as though it was made fully and effectively as though the third code that's come in was applied from the point of investment. So that has been through various iterations and agreed as an approach at the outset. I think it hasn't then been challenged when the rules changed the second time, and that's the issue we've got. So obviously we've then made a correction to address that, and that's where we are now. So under that assessment, I think the second set of guidance came in, I think, from memory, from the 1st of April 19. So from that point onwards, there's therefore a concern that's been raised, and we've now rectified with this approach. Sorry, and just if you could just remind me of your other questions. Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, Councillor, use your microphone, please.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, what reassurances can you give that we'll be able to continue to provide our statutory services?
Yes, yeah, thank you. So, so even under the Section 114 notice, the requirement is to provide and continue to provide statutory services. So we are continuing as a council to provide those services. We continue to meet our contractual obligations, but we will also, under a Section 114, obviously have to look at anything non-statutory and look at all our spend in more detail. So inevitably we will set up some form of spending panel to make sure we manage our costs as effectively as possible and support ourselves in terms of managing that cost to its lowest level, making sure good decision making is made on all future spend for the rest of this year, and while under the period of the 114. So, and that period will cover, I anticipate, at least next year. So we will need to look at our revenue spend, our capital spend, and we will have to manage that. We will continue to pay our staff, we will continue to pay contractors, we will continue to meet those obligations and deliver statutory services. But obviously we, as a council, are also looking at a savings programme, and we're also looking at our savings in the context of others. So we're doing a benchmarking exercise with SITFA. SITFA provide the data. We can see where we are. We know already we benchmark very low in social care, for example. So those that makes up a huge, significant part of our cost base. So our scope for savings is limited immediately by that very premise. But there are other areas where we specifically can see we can target further savings, and particularly around the environment area would be one, for example.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. I did have, I think, 4 questions, but something that Councillor Arnold asked has just kind of raised another for me. But before then, can I just thank the leader for deferring this item last night? I don't think there's going to be much constructive by way of suggestion or recommendation tonight, because, frankly, we are where we are. Picking up on Councillor Arnold's question, and just to put it, I think, a different way, we agreed a budget back in February. We agreed a capital strategy that told us that what we were agreeing was compliant with the Prudential Code. Was that accurate back in February? And if not, can you explain why members were given that assurance when it came to setting the budget? Can you give us an assurance that what is written in here, when it comes to both adherence, compliance with the Prudential Code and minimum revenue provision, is now right, is sufficient, is accurate? Can you then explain to us, we're told that exceptional financial support is likely to be by way of a capitalisation directive. Can you just explain to us what that is, what it does, what it means? You have told us that it's almost inevitable there'll be a Section 114 notice before Christmas. Again, can you explain exactly what that is and what the consequences of it are? I think, understand there's the best value inspection ongoing, and there'll be lots of kind of recommendations from that. I'm concerned that the council appears to have borrowed before need from the Public Works Loans Board, and the Public Works Loan Board doesn't appear to have done its due diligence when it's issued that loan. Do you think they have questions to answer? The external auditor doesn't appear to have picked up on the fact that we weren't adhering to the Prudential Code. Do you think the external auditor also has questions to answer? And finally, and I think you kind of half got there with answer to Councillor Holloway, you said that what we need to do is give government confidence that we can be a sustainable council. When do you think you will be able to give them that confidence?
Thank you, Councillor Kent. In terms of the MRP and the capital strategy, the issues obviously specifically are linked to the investments that are reflected in the revised valuations and the revised approach. When the strategy was taken out, the policy, so everybody is clear what the policy was that the MRP wasn't made because the assertion was that the recovery of funds at the end of the investment would pay back the borrowing underpinning it. That assertion obviously held until recently, when obviously the wider issues have come out and the significant figures in the report are now reflected. And that approach was an approach that wasn't just taken by this council. That was an approach taken by other councils, and that was approach actually at the time advisors were taking that approach and supporting that approach in a range of settings in local authorities. Obviously, the risk in that approach is now very, very clear because we are having to write down. If we had written down in an appropriate way under the new policy that we are doing now, our exposure to risk would have been more limited, significantly. To the extent we'd have written down, our exposure would have been reduced, essentially. So we have to accept that, particularly in the situation we are, we need a very prudent write-down. And the risk attaching to investments has definitely been underestimated, and that is clear in the figures that we're seeing. But in terms of an approach, was it valid at the time? Yes, it was valid. Was it valid? It was an approach that was deemed acceptable, I think. That's the way I would describe it, under the first version of the Prudential Code. I think under the second version of the Prudential Code, there were some changes to that code, and I think that the key change being that MRP was required on all assets, and obviously the risk continued to be taken, and a smaller MRP could have been made to be compliant with the rules, and we broadly would have found ourselves in the same position but compliant. I think it's clear it's non-compliant retrospectively, and I think the MRP focus, a policy was in place and it continued to be followed, and that wasn't challenged, and it's now clearly not working and been challenged, and we've retrospectively sought to fix that over the last couple of months to make sure we are not having that exposure, and that significant write-down brings us back up to date with where we should be. I just want to draw a distinction though between the investment, all these issues we're talking about, all the financial issues, virtually all of the financial gap is relating to investments and an approach taken. And the MRP policy for our capital assets has been compliant throughout the process. Just so members understand, there are lots of judgments in the accounts. MRP is a judgment call, and there's a range across which you can take it. Under pressure, I think authorities have gravitated to the wrong end of that scale because their budgets have pushed them in that direction. So the pressure on budgets has been a factor in that assessment. But the broader factor with investments was obviously the intention was to recover funds at the end of that process, and that hasn't, obviously, as we currently sit here, been the case. To explain a capitalisation direction, so we are reflecting a £452 million gap. We are effectively asking to put that on our balance sheet and spread the payment of that over 20 years. So that enables us time to then make the changes we need to make to get back to a sustainable position, and effectively the key chunk of that replaces the lost investment value on our balance sheet so that we are balanced on our balance sheet again, effectively. The Section 114 in essence is a confirmation from myself as Section 151 officer that the council cannot meet its budget this year. So there's no way to meet that without seeking support, as we said earlier, and that formally confirms that to government. And it also commits the council, as I said, to work through steps to control their costs in the short term, initially while council receive and consider the notice and respond, and then through the period attaching to the 114 notice. So we, as a council, will have to manage our spend more carefully, much more carefully than we are now. We will set up a panel, we will set limits for spend approval, and that will all go through, ultimately, myself, and we will manage that process. Similarly, on capital projects, we will do a similar process, essentially. That doesn't prevent where sustainable business plans can be brought forward for transformational change. That doesn't prevent that happening. But obviously, where we're asking to fund something up front for a longer term benefit, it will obviously be subject to more scrutiny than it's ever been, because every commitment we make to do that is effectively putting money at risk in the short term to generate hopefully a longer term gain. But a best value position overrides the control on cost where that is deemed in the interest of the authority. But obviously that is a high bar to cross, but that is what we need to do to transform services, and that's the key focus for us as officers. So we will set out the period that attaches to, as I say, my initial thought on that is that will take us through to at least the end of next year, because we are already seeking support for next year. So, and we also need to seek assurance, or I need to seek personal assurance from members, and that essentially those cost control measures will be followed, and that will be delivered and implemented appropriately. So we have to, I think what I would summarise as, we have to, as a council, demonstrate we are doing everything we can to address the issues that have arisen, and we are managing our costs appropriately wherever we can, essentially. So that is the section 114. The BV inspection, yeah, we'll bring. Sorry, Councillor King, can you just remind me your question on the BV?
It was not kind of trying to anticipate the outcome of the inspection, but it's fairly clear now that the council has borrowed from Public Works Loans Board before need and used some of that money to invest.
Yeah.
Have the Public Works Loans Board got questions to answer about the due diligence they carried out before they loaned Thurrock money? And also, the external auditor appears to have kind of waved through some and you used a wonderful phrase, what was it? An approach deemed acceptable to minimum revenue provision and prudential code. Are there questions for the external auditor?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So on PWLB, the process is essentially, so members know, there's a prudential code in place that we've talked about, and the prudential code in respect of borrowing means the council is committing to be able to fund the borrowing and the cost of borrowing that it takes on within its budget. So that's the broad. And the rules changed. There used to be much more restrictions on when you sought capital funding, but essentially, if you confirm you can manage that cost, you can borrow the money for capital purposes. So many of our investments are capital investments attached to underlying assets like the solar assets. There are other investments we're assessing where it's less clear, and I think on those items we are making a full assessment of all the investments, obviously, as part of this process. Where we think that's the case, we will be seeking potentially to divest of those assets. One, because we need to for the position itself, but the alternative reason alongside it is that if they're not capital, then we will not be working within the capital financing requirements set for the council, because they are not capital in nature. So, have they got questions to answer? Well, I can't comment on their due diligence at the point where they issue the funding, but there are a range of issues arising across a range of councils, and the ability to seek and access finance is part of this story. And I think, therefore, as with all aspects of the strategies that have been employed by a range of councils, I think it's not unreasonable that they should look at all aspects from start to finish of how investments are taken out, funded and managed thereafter. So I think that would be reasonable. And certainly what you can see subsequent to 2020 is that the PWLB rules became a lot tighter. You now have to confirm you're not borrowing to invest specifically when you take the money out. So there's a very clear requirement there. In terms of the external audit, that process is obviously ongoing, and they will consider what information was available at different points in time. They will reflect, ultimately they're reflecting balance sheet positions at a date in time. They will make those assessments, as we said earlier. They obviously have asked for all of the investment information subsequent to this, and we're engaging with them and making sure that information is available, and they will come back to our committees to answer those questions. I can also tell you they've been part of the interview process for the BVI, so there should be a rounded view of coming back from the BVI on that as well. But I think it's important that they come and answer those questions in the Standards and Audit Committee forum at appropriate times, and they will give a view on how they've treated those investments specifically when they do so. And I think they gave a brief update to the committee previously at the last meeting.
Councillor Kent, you want to respond?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. I think I've got two questions arising from that. But first, on Section 114, specifically, my understanding of the Section 114 notice is that it's kind of a retreat to statutory provision, statutory minimum. My understanding is also that that is as defined by you as Section 151 officer. So your role becomes absolutely critical, pivotal. Can you just talk a little bit about statutory minimum? And the second one is on capitalisation direction, where there have been a number of these over the last few years in places like Bexley, the Wirral, Eastbourne, Luton, Peterborough, lots and lots of them. Yeah. They're all slightly different, but one thing that is in common is that if those authorities have the need to borrow in the future, then it has to be from Public Works Loans Board, and that's at a 1% supplement. Is that your understanding that will be the same for Thurrock?
So on the latter, that is definitely the starting point, right, but that's part of a discussion with DLUC as well about sustainability. On the Section 114 statutory minimum, so essentially the spending panel will dictate that. The spending panel will look at all costs as it comes through and make an assessment of future orders, future procurement, etc., and will make a judgment on whether that spend is needed or otherwise. Those rules will obviously come back with more detail to Council in due course, and we'll set out clarity on that thereafter.
It seems the spending panel then is going to be pivotal to what happens for residents in the borough for some time. Who's going to be on the spending panel? Who's going to appoint it? Where's the oversight? Where's the member oversight of that spending panel going to be?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So we're just working through that at the moment. So, but obviously transparency and oversight is key in obviously the way we're approaching this and the briefing. So I expect it to be equally the same, and you will obviously yourself receive that update through the Financial Recovery Board when we put the arrangements in place.
Thank you.
Jonathan, just going back to Section 114 just briefly, it's something that all members, residents, officers avoid to see here in Thurrock. I believe in declaring 114 within 21 days, is it a full council? Is it a public meeting is called? And then what would the agenda for that meeting look like?
So obviously the notice is issued, you're right, it's 21 days, not 21 working days. So ultimately it's for a response from Council to acknowledge the implementation of the arrangements that come in place as part of the 114, to acknowledge the 114 itself, and hopefully to endorse the arrangements that are being put in place to address the spending controls that are required under the legislation, essentially. So that's the purpose of that meeting. If you can see some other examples, we're not quite at that stage yet. Obviously, we're working through the dates and the issue of that. But the expectation is, if you see alternatives, Croydon have recently issued a 114, and prior to that, Slough have issued a 114. So you can see some examples there. And I think if you look at Slough, we, as 151, I'll make a series of recommendations along the lines we've just discussed, and it's for council to acknowledge, question and understand, obviously, hopefully fully understand the position we're sharing tonight, first of all, to understand why the 114's needed, and obviously to note, therefore, we need to respond as a council and hopefully acknowledge that the response is in line with the requirements and supported by council.
Thank you, Jonathan. Questions from members? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned other councils issuing a 114, but we are absolutely unique as far as I'm aware. And having read the press, a Guardian article announced that we are one of the biggest ever financial disasters in local government. And the chief accountant of SIPFA, the public sector accounts body, also in the same article said he hadn't seen anything like it in his 30-year career. So my question, underpinning all of this, was a governance issue and a fundamental, for me, a breakdown of trust and respect in the democratic process and the governance and the running of the council. That whilst this financial situation, I think, is shocking to everyone, the knowledge of a bad financial situation wasn't shocking to anyone, because it had been raised over a number of years. A number of concerns were raised over a number of years. My question is, what happens in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again? The people that the administration, however we want, I can word it, are still the ones that are having conversations. Are the ones that got us into this mess, frankly, are the ones that are being tasked to get us out of it. And I am concerned what oversight is there. It's the same people that got us into this situation. And to be very frank, I don't have any faith and I don't have any trust in them to be able to get us out of it. I don't trust them to run a bath, let alone a local authority. What assurances can you provide me and residents that this won't ever be allowed to happen again, and the oversight is happening now?
Yeah. So, obviously, the purpose of the BVI inspection, I'm sure we'll come back with very clear recommendations around governance. Everyone's expecting that to be the case. And the improvement recovery plan will then pick up those actions specifically. And commissioners are obviously here. They're not here for 3 months. They're here for a minimum of 3 years. So commissioners provide an additional layer of governance over the council as a whole. So I can speak specifically when it comes to the reports. I'm working directly with commissioners on all reports, and they are looking at all issues of significance financially. Their directions are very clear in terms of their clear role in financial governance of this authority. So obviously we are resetting, therefore, a financial future with commissioners, with the department, and the BVI will then tackle the governance issues. We've obviously got to wait and see what that is, and it's imminent. It's due next month, so we will get those findings. They will be added to the plan, and significant change is happening alongside that. I hope members here and in cabinet and wider forums feel they are getting detailed information through informally and enabled to questions and understanding of these reports. So we will continue to work through that, and that's, for me, has been a really positive outcome of working with commissioners. Their desire to engage with you as members has been really welcome, and I think I've found the forums useful. Simple comments like Councillor Arnold's point on clarity of reporting and explaining issues. I'm taking all of this on board as we go through and just trying to tailor and make sure these reports are as clear as possible. And I appreciate there is lots of technical detail to them as well. But overall, the governance arrangements on everything we look at are actually the first thought of commissioners, and it is a sea change as an officer to work within that framework, and as I say, a really welcome change for me personally, and I'm sure other officers feel the same.
Councillor Arnold was next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. The only thing I will say, just in response to Councillor Holloway, is that the leader has actually extended a very genuine offer to all members to engage, to come up with solutions and to try and give us the best way forward for this. So I will just say that it is up to all members to actually approach the leader, have a very open conversation. He said his door's always open. It is, and that's the only thing I'm going to say on this.
You forget Councillor Arnold. Any other members? Any other questions on this at all before we move to recommendation? The recommendations are found on page 44. The recommendations 1.1 through to 1.10. Does any member wish to go into more detail on any particular one of those 10 recommendations? No. Based on that, are we happy to take them on block from 1.1 through to 1.10? Is that agreed? Thank you, committee. Thank you, Jonathan. We now have agenda item 7, the local council tax scheme, which is found on pages 77 to 84. And I'll ask Andy Britton to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Brief introduction from me. The report sets out the Council's obligation to consider the Council Tax Support Scheme for working age people annually. The information included within the report allows consideration of the main recommendation that the current scheme for working age people remains unchanged for the forthcoming financial year, and it currently drives a high collection rate and low complaints. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Andy Britton, for your report. Having looked through it, it looks quite straightforward. It looks like it's bringing us up to date with other standards that are there nationally. It doesn't look like the current system has many issues from what I can see by reading the report. I'm happy to see what other members of the committee feel about this item. Anyone have any questions? Quite straightforward, I believe. Okay, let me just find the recommendations. Page 77. Apologies, members, I wasn't expecting to have absolutely zero questions on. Just find the recommendations.
I'll ask a question while you find it. Given the fact that claimants dropped last year before we entered a cost of living crisis, have you made an assessment of the likelihood of having increased claimants this year? And if so, what does that tell you?
Yeah, so within the council tax space, we are forecasting for the potential of an increase in unemployment, etc., which will have a knock-on effect to the LCTS cost.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. I think based on things like cost of living, inflation, I think that's impacting our residents. I think it's good that we're recommending to support the same scheme through 23-24. And that brings to the recommendations on page 77, the recommendations of this committee to note the analysis of the current scheme, 1.1, and 1.2 to support the recommendation that the current scheme remains unchanged for 2023/24. Are all members in agreement with those recommendations? They are agreed. Thank you very much, Andy. Moving on to item 8, which we've taken earlier in the meeting. So we're going to go to item 9, which is the work programme, which is pages 119 to 120. Before I ask members if they had anything to add to the work programme, I would like to propose that we add something to the work programme for the next meeting. That would be Coalhouse Faults update. As we have Thameside coming back in the same meeting, I know it's going to be a big meeting with the budget and other items, but I feel that there's similarities in terms of the asset management with Thameside and Coalhouse, and the fact that there's two parties involved in each site. I think it would be good for it to come to this committee. I just wonder if I could get members' thoughts on that, please. Councillor Kent.
I think it's purely coincidental that the member for East Tilbury, who chairs the committee, is up for re-election in May. But leaving that aside, I think it is a good idea. I think it's too long since we had any sort of discussion on Coalhouse Fault and the future for Coalhouse Fault. And I've always said that this is overview and scrutiny. And we tend to do the scrutiny bit, but we don't do the overview bit. And if Coalhouse Fault isn't going anywhere else, then we should call for it to come here. I think it might be an idea that if it comes in February, that we just invite Chair, Vice Chair, somebody from Cleaner, Greener, Safer to come to the meeting and have an input, because it does kind of cross some boundaries.
I agree with that as well. I would also be happy for Councillor Salmons as the other ward member to attend, and in collaboration with other chairs of committees that are attached to Coalhouse Fault. I saw Karen Whelan nodding head earlier, so yep, that's all fine. So if we can get that added to the work programme, please, Lucy, for the next meeting. Any other member anything to add for the work programme? Councillor Carter.
I think it's just worth noting that due to the ongoing situation, this work programme is likely to change, so if we could all just be kept in a loop by anyone. And I know you will, Chair, so thank you.
Chair echoes those comments. We can be kept up to date. I know it's lots of things that are changing. I'm always happy to take briefings and give that information out to members, or we can all the members can be in the briefing. I'm quite happy for that, each way, whatever suits members best. Anything else for the work programme? No? Okay. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed at 8:52 p.m. Thank you, and get home safe. Thank you.